Ugh. Ooh. All right.
Life is beautiful.
I think it should let me in shortly. All right, here we go. No, make noise. Some.
Hello. Hello,
Hello.
hello, hello.
All right, cool. So,
Do, re.
um, with this stream, this will be the last Paleo stream for a while. While we focus on other sort of deep dives into libertarian bullshit. And with regard to this one, this is going to be the last two planks of the Paleo strategy. People can feel free to throw this link around if folks want in on the actual discussion and not just being a viewer. They're free to do so as well. But it should be a relatively good one either way. I sent the link around to a bunch of people, but I don't know. Maybe there's like an extended multi-day hangover from July 4th. Either way, lots to discuss. And so we'll be saying words about shit and other things than shit. So, with that being said, these two have been on before. Let's introduce Jamie and then Hody. Take as long as you need to introduce thyself.
Hi, everyone. Jamie Van Alstyne, libertarian in Michigan. I should say officially an anarchist, also an archaeologist and historian, and just generally a girl.
All right.
Cool. I'm Hody Johns. I'm with the Love First Christians. I am a professional writer for video games. I do guides, articles, reviews, that kind of thing. Living a very, very blessed life. Happy to be living in it. Happy to be kind of. I know it's a dead horse we're beating on, but for some reason it's a zombie dead horse, and it keeps getting back up. So I'm excited to, at least for our generation, put this horse in the ground one more time.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's a lot more affiliated with the paleo strategy, and maybe we can get into some of the thinkers specifically and, delve into who Pat Buchanan was and, the general support for a bunch of other bullshit. But, for this particular purpose, all we're doing is going through the actual proposal section, the platform of it, in the Rothbard Rockwell report. I think I got that backwards, but I don't care. So the general vibe of this is going to be we already went over the first 8, I believe, and the last one we went over was the idea of unleashing the cops on the homeless. And hey, wouldn't you know, recently the Rothbardians got their way, and the paleo strategy will be tested because the Supreme Court has recently legalized the oppression of homeless people and the turning of the homeless people into a perpetual slave class for the prison industrial complex by putting them in jail, and then after they get out of jail they're still homeless because they're banning sleeping in camping in cities. So these people will still be in the same fucking situation regardless of what happens. And they're just going to be recycled out of prison and then immediately back into it. So people can briefly discuss that because I do think that's important because it happened recently and I don't remember whether or not we went over that in the last fucking shit.
I think it was abolish the Fed, right?
Yeah.
We did do that because that I got to agree a lot with Rose. Remember, Reinhold was kind of like, "Well, abolishing the Fed's not going to make everything better." We had
Well,
that kind of
and to be clear, it
interaction.
might not, but still should happen. Because it's like maybe anarchy wouldn't make everything better. That doesn't mean I don't fucking want it to happen. So, but yeah, we can talk about the homeless part relatively quickly. The recent legislation, y'all are free to say some words about that because I do think that's relevant to the discussion. If you want, up to you.
Yeah, I mean, when you, of course, California has a huge homeless problem, principally because of housing availability and of course the associated costs with a limited um, uh, housing availability. And a lot, not all, but a lot of the homeless problem in California are working class people. They have jobs that they go to, 4 and 5 days a
Yes.
week. They just can't afford housing. And so not only are you essentially imprisoning these people for being in such circumstances, but again, we know what happens once you are a felon. Once you've been in the system, then even the jobs that they had are going to be at risk. You lose your
Yeah.
job, then you have problems getting employment. So it just becomes, as you said, it becomes a cycle, but it becomes a compounding cycle.
Yeah. And like
And
go sorry. Say words.
no, go ahead.
I've got some diatribe I'm going to launch into. If there's something you want to finish with, feel free.
Well, I mean, it's similar to the war on drugs. I mean, once you get somebody in the system, you've broken families, you've broken, you've destroyed communities, and you've made whatever problem that existed exponentially worse. And this does the same thing in my mind.
Yeah.
It helps no one.
Exactly. And like so the felon thing is very interesting because people are like, "Oh, well, certain jobs do accept felons." Here's the problem with that, and I know this from talking to so many fucking people who actually have those jobs that accept felons. Oh, aren't they sweet? Aren't they generous? Aren't they blah blah? They get government subsidies for that shit. A lot of the time, they will get government subsidies to do so, and so they've got a baseline of not having to earn profit, and um, when they've got a group of people in their employ who can't do shit if they want to get a different job because the amount of jobs that are like felon friendly are so limited that what are you going to do? Quit and be homeless again and go back to prison for camping?
Yeah, no, I mean, not that service industry work is bad work. I think all labor is good labor, especially if it's paid labor.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, there's very few employers and very few fields. I mean, you're not going to get into caring for children if you're a felon. You know what I mean? So you have your fields are limited by that. So essentially, you are beholden to certain types of employment and employers. And to me, that's only a slight step up from feudalism, when you're a
Yeah,
serf tied to the land kind of thinking.
for sure. Biblical anarchy.
Punishing the homeless.
Go ahead.
Sorry, biblical anarchy. I love him.
Yep.
Read him.
He says, "What the fuck did I walk into?" And this is a sort of the finale stream on for now anyway, because we'll be going back into some of this later on the Paleo strategy of Rothbard era. You're welcome on if you want to come talk about it, but basically we've been going over for weeks and weeks and weeks, like months and months, the planks of the Paleo strategy. And one of the things that happened recently was the ruling from the Supreme Court that basically legalized turning the homeless population into a prison labor force, an eternal prison labor force, because the Supreme Court says that it's okay to lock up homeless people who camp within city limits, but those people need to camp within city limits because they don't have the money for a house and the shelters are occupied. So basically, the people involved in these sorts of like stings, they will be swept off the street. If they persist, they will be locked up, and those people will be turned into fodder for the prison industrial complex. So I oppose that dramatically. And I think that it's a good example of what Rothbard's strategy does in practice when he says, unleash the cops on the bums and vagrants. Where will they go? Who cares? Hopefully, you know, and I'm loosely quoting this because I don't have it up in front of me right now, but like, hopefully they will like uh, return to the working like world and, you know, like away from the petted and cosseted bum class. This was in the same document where he said that we have underclass rule because welfare exists. He had a very, well, I mean, he's dead now, so he doesn't got shit, but like he had a very poor impression of poor people and people who needed any amount of assistance, people who needed any amount of advantage in various spaces. He also didn't like civil rights laws for a variety of reasons. But yeah, like we've been going over that shit, and we basically went over that last time. But there's also like, you know, and the time before that, because like there was some overlap. I wanted to get some of the newer guests' impressions on the previous planks. But basically, yeah, the paleo strategy finisher tonight will be going over the last two planks and the sort of family values segment of his screed, because I think it's valuable to really hammer down on certain points that were said here. So you're welcome on if you want. I can send you a join link. Let me know if you do, and I will shoot one to you on Tweltwer. But the general vibe is... Go ahead, Hody. You wanted to say words?
Yeah, I mean, just a couple things. I think especially we're kind of reading some Bible books in our books of the Bible in our Bible study right now. And boy, even from the Old Testament, it's very clear that how you treat the homeless is very directly tied to how much you love God. And there's no way around it. Like there's not, so when Rothbard says in his thing, and you actually quoted it very almost verbatim, is I have it up here, but again, unleash the cops to clear the streets of bums and vagrants. Where will they go? Who cares? Well, if a Christian, it is literally your job to care. Mm-hmm. So this is something that not only, well, Christian or Jew, if you want to use the Old Testament or the New Testament, this is something that does not change. Is your heart is reflected in how you treat the less fortunate. And so when you choose to treat them badly, that says everything about who you are as a person and where your values are. So when somebody like Rothbard says, who cares, you can't really just let it go and just say like, whatever. Like you can say like, well, morally, I don't believe we should pay for them. Fine. Like that is perfectly fine. If you say like, I shouldn't compel somebody else or steal their money to pay for them or something like that. But that's not what this doctrine is. In fact, this doctrine is to stop making them feel like cosseted and like luxurious or whatever. Like anybody's actually doing that for the homeless right now. We're just trying to keep them alive. Mm-hmm. That's perfectly fine to keep them alive. This is something we should be encouraging society to do and not discouraging society to do like it is in here. The other part, and you guys have addressed this was kind of a summation of what everybody else said when we talked about this last time, but this isn't the root of the problem. Corruption is the root of the part of the problem. That white collar crime we talked about is a lot of the root of the problem. Politicians are the root of the problem. And until you remove all those reasons, you know, we like to say, well, they got addicted to drugs. How many of them? I mean, go down and ask how many of them first got prescribed them and just had trouble. Like there was no system for getting them off of a heavily addicted substance their body depends on. Like, I mean, this is something that's just, you know, and emotional pain and turmoil. Yeah, people turn to drugs. Did we give them a healthy option for dealing with it? Did they know about that? Maybe we could bring that up instead. We look at other successful countries that have dealt with this instead of criminalizing homelessness is offered more of these programs and connection. One of the things they found is that shame doesn't break people out of cycles. Community does. And so instead of shoving these people out of society, it's better to bring them into society. What's going to keep our Hunter Bidens of the world from being homeless? Even opportunities you don't think that they deserve. Stop them from being violent felons and robbing stores and stuff by loving them, by hiding them from the police. I mean, the people who created these laws know to hide them from the police because they know it's not done out of helpfulness or love. It's done out of hate. And it's just playing. It's funny because this comes off as very like, oh, I'm really anti-establishment for all my hate. No, you're not. This is exactly the type of hate that politicians have. You're just embracing it. And get at the root of the problem. Illegalizing homelessness is clearly not the root of the problem. Until you've gotten rid of that Fed, until you've gotten rid of all the terrible legal things that we do, until you've stopped making cutting off avenues for felons to become good members of society, undiscriminated against, read Les Miserables. Look what happens to Valjean. If you want Valjean to become a productive, do you want him to become a productive mayor, or do you want him to be a bread thief for life? It's your choice. We know human psychology enough to know how this works, and we should do things that work. Not just, even just says in the thing, well, hopefully they become good people. Hope. What? Since you're an economist, what do you mean? Hopefully, you know what's going to happen to these people. They're going to die, right? This is something even Marx wouldn't debate on. He's like, oh yeah, when you kick people out of society, they die, right? This is not so I don't know. I'm just so frustrated by the anti-homeless, anti-poor hate, especially from anybody that loosely considers themselves a Christian. Yeah. I want to at least bring up that perspective because I can't tolerate it.
Yeah, and additionally to that, here's the other half of the getting on pain pills thing. Because we live under state capitalism. We live under a paradigm where people must work in order to live. And in order to not be homeless, in order to have their family taken care of, in order. And because of that, a lot of the reason people get on pain pills instead of simply fucking recovering... okay. Biblical Anarchy said he was referring to you and Hody making incoherent noises. That is because I do not yet have a beginning slate. I'll be working on that. We just make some noises and make sure that desktop audio is on, because sometimes I've cunted it up and it's been, fucked for the first 30 or 40 minutes. So anyway... Yeah, that's what that is. We just make some noises here and there. Make sure the desktop audio is actually working. The thing that I was saying is because we don't have mechanisms for people to actually to take time off, because paid time off is a luxury, because having time off to begin with that you can afford with all of the expenses people have, with them barely making do, with a lot of the time, people won't take that time to recover and instead will need to get back to work. And so what do we have? We have the most expansive narcotics industry / fucking ameliorative industry on the fucking planet. And we have pharmaceutical companies marketing directly to consumers in ads saying, hey, take this fucking pill and get back to work, bitch. Yeah, your life depends on it. Your family will die, and your loved ones will hate you. Get back to work. Take fucking Vicodin and shut the fuck up, prol. And so then they do that, and then they're addicted, and then society is trained to hate addicts of any sort. They're blamed. The addicts are shamed. That doesn't help. It creates more problems. And what do you know? The cycle of addiction continues because the environment is made bad and then continued to be bad. And a lot of these people end up homeless. I fucking wonder why. It's almost like if they were given a better place to live and a better way to do it, a lot of these things could be ameliorated. But what do I know? I'm just a bleeding heart who a lot of people call a commie. If this makes me a commie, excellent. Heil Marx. But yeah.
So I was just,
Jamie.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. Pre-modern medicine, pre-industrialization. It was oftentimes that you could not take time off. So, that's not a new phenomenon. But I think it's interesting that you brought up the pharmaceutical industry itself, and you just take a pill for it. And while I applaud modern medicine, I don't want to live back in the days where, there was TB and, we didn't have vaccines for common childhood diseases that killed children. But the difference between, what we are doing in terms of a marketing strategy of these pharmaceuticals versus what we did back then before they were available is, even if you did injure yourself and you still had to go out there to feed your family, there was a community typically that was there and available and very supportive of you. It wasn't that you were doing it alone. So even you didn't get paid time off, but we've traded that sense of community for that little purple pill or whatever it is, right?
Yeah, or a blue pill in case you got the wrong kind of community. Yeah,
Right.
so Biblical Anarchy says paleoconservatism is often just cultural Christianity. I'm going to send you a link. You can come on. That might be an interesting exchange between you and Hody, because I don't think so. I think paleoconservatism is often a replacement for actual Christianity, and I think Hody might agree with that. I'm going to send you a link. You can feel free to send this, the show link to folks, but I feel like that's a place where you could come on and discuss. Maybe it's up to you, but the general thing that I believe is, I believe personally, the idea of paleoconservatism is, and the reason it's called paleo, is that there was a time when conservatism was better, and that we need to go back to that time in order to reach a better conclusion. And I don't think so, especially for the minorities, especially for the poor, especially for a variety of other people I can mention. The times have gradually improved in a variety of ways, that moving back to that time would not help, especially since, there was a time when certain level of paleo or trad would have burned down black businesses or lynched them. There's a certain time when it would have torched somebody for being LGBT. There's a time. I kind of just don't think going back is the answer. I think we need to go even further forward and understand that the previous societies were all failed experiments in statism, and we need an actual experiment in freedom in the form of real anarchy, not conservatism, not like some sort of Christian nationalism, as you've been arguing against relatively recently. We need actual freedom, anarchy. So I'll send you a link. You are welcome to dispute that should you decide to. For now, though, we will, unless there's somebody who wants to talk about what was just said, we will move on to the next two planks. All right. So I have the document pulled up now, and the document includes all of the things we've already gone over. And we were on America First. Now this is a plank that really means a fuck ton, because it like Germany first, America first. Well, you could come on for 20 minutes. It's up to you. America first, Germany first. They're oftentimes fascist slogans that result in your nation being given primacy. So I'm going to say that, even though it might be considered poisoning the well, because the rest of this document, talking about people like Pat Buchanan and David Duke, that sort of informs it, in my opinion. But America first, a key point and not meant to be seventh in priority. The American economy is not only in recession, it is stagnating. The average family is worse off now than it was 2 decades ago. Come home, America. Stop supporting bums abroad. Stop all foreign aid, which is aid to banksters and their bonds and their export industries. Stop globaloney, and let's solve our problems at home. Now, 3 things from my perspective, and then I'll throw it to people. I'll make this very short. The first thing is, it depends to me on the place foreign aid is going. But he supported people like George H.W. Bush, who were warmongers and had no problem absolutely destroying other countries. And and working at the behest of the CIA and the intelligence industrial complexes and shit. So if the US fucks up another country, or if the US, for instance, their cops come in and fuck up somebody's house, to me, like, that means that they owe that person like compensation, or those countries maybe compensation. And if they don't give it to them, they should expect to be in perpetual war forever while they create new enemies, fuck up their places, don't pay for shit, and then leave, and then say, you can't get us. Well, eventually somebody's going to get us. So I don't think that's a winning strategy. So it depends on where the aid is going, whether it's to maintain vassal states, or whether it's to and enrich the banksters, or whether it's to repair damages. And then, like, does he mean to say we can't trade with any foreign country under his idea of libertarianism? Because Ron Paul's idea of sanctions being an act of war, that kind of directly conflicts with that, and I prefer the Ron Paul school in this particular respect. And so all of that, and then solve our problems at home, after you just told us that one of the problems that we have at home is something that we shouldn't care about. Who cares? You're not solving shit at home. So that's my thing. Like, you know, he's taking this hands-off approach until it's time to, like, appeal to the inner senses of the bleeding hearts and say, no, we'll solve the problems at home. How? You're just saying who cares when a problem comes up. So you two say as many words as you want. Those are my words.
You want to go? Okay, I'll go. Yeah, I mean, to me, I hate America first. I hate anything first. I hate the concept of America. I mean, I'm an anarchist. The state, right. I mean, I know, I mean, libertarians, you could make somewhat of a case to have, you know, talk about focusing on America's trade and foreign policy and that, but, you know, I want to tear the state down. I want it to go away. But most of the problems that he's talking about are state-created problems. And it's ironic, I mean, as you mentioned, is he's talking about, you know, all of these state-created problems, and now he's saying, well, you know, now let's have the state fix it. Let's focus on the state fixing it. And to me, it's just, it doesn't, for his early work, it's a big contrast here, because to me, this is not clear thinking. There's contradictions and hypocrisies just embedded throughout.
Yeah.
What's the line where business lines cross, troops don't? I think, to me, if you really want to be anti-war, the best thing you can do is amp up your business relations with a country. Boy, usually I manage to kind of make my faith secondary, but just to bring up my faith again, I'm from a belief that you can stick a Christian in the middle of a hostile place, like as Jesus commanded with the apostles. Go to Rome, go to India, go to Ethiopia, go to places where they'll kill you or something for preaching what you preach. But your message is going to be so powerful that it will spread kinetically among those people, because people don't naturally love being subject to evil, subject to difficult things, subject to the harm, to hating their neighbors. And so that idea, even if they kill you, it's you strike me down, we could become stronger. And that certainly applies to liberty as well. How many liberty lovers died? I mean, like most of them for most of human history. And yet the idea of liberty persists and is more powerful because they were willing to be struck down. This isn't something that needs to be nationalized. This is something that needs to be spread as any other great technology, tool, or philosophy. It needs to be delivered to other people. And we can do that by opening up our business lines to these people. One of the things, and boy, Putin told hundreds of lies in his interview with Tucker Carlson. But one of the things that I listed when I was documenting the lies and doing the fact check on that was that he did mention that it's like, well, cutting us off from business kind of made us take on different business partners. And there are business partners that you like. And now these countries are insulating business. This is what happens when you kick, like, It's funny because a lot of these same folks don't like it when you kick bigots out of their groups. And for whatever it's worth, I agree with them, not for the reasons that they think, but because I don't think, much like addiction, that sticking these people together and having them form their own society is going to result in something that's healthy for them. What I think is healthy for them is actually getting them more involved with your culture and having them go, I'd much rather be a part of this one than that one. This idea that, like, let's divide from our neighbors, do you really think that that will create more American love if we just ignore the world, if we don't do anything? I get how not starting wars, absolutely great minimum to have, and politicians F it up all the time. But he's specifically mentioning business here. That's absolutely something. Can you imagine how much more safe we'd be if we take 1% of what we spend attacking other countries and just gave it to them as charity, just directly to the people to help their people? Can you imagine how unpopular it would be for a politician to then be like, yeah, let's blow up that country, or let's allow terrorists to live here that blow up that country? Absolutely not. There would be no call for it. And it's something that we can prove consistently among our willing business allies when we have them. Unfortunately, we've taken this authoritarian take, which is kind of classic among politicians, and unfortunately kind of classic right here with the paleo conservatives. And it's a real shame, because it's a real missed opportunity. When you read like hardcore capitalist literature, they're really letting their own philosophy down by promoting something like this. I am with you, Jamie. I hate just using the term America first puts me off. It's like I wouldn't encourage the Germans to say, Das Nationalfreundliche the first or whatever. I don't want the Luftwaffe first. I don't want the Third Reich first. And so naturally, I don't want America first either. That's a great way to turn evil. I have to invoke my faith because I just have to, but I am required to see us all as children of God. We even get told when we don't do that, we're no better than the animals, much less better than one another. So, and that's, again, something that's just in my faith. And so this idea that like some people are morally better than others, what's it like all those libertarian paleo leaners said on Timcast the other day, like the problem is that we morally value the lives of immigrants as well as our own. Yeah, you're damn right I do. You're damn right I do.
Exactly.
Any force used against them, do you not believe politicians will use that force against me someday? Come on, get real. You guys know how government works. You're just looking the other way when it's against the people that you dislike.
Exactly. So we will, Kareem, you can speak in a bit. Jacob's got extremely limited time, if I understand correctly. So say whatever words you wanted to say. Introduce yourself. Plug some stuff. You can also find me on a recent episode of the Libertarian Christian Institute. Still doing better numbers than Mike Rechtenwald, so I'm pretty happy with that. Jacob, you have the floor, and you're free to use your camera.
Don't need any gummies.
You must have taken a gummy before you hopped on.
Yeah. See, that's my secret. I'm doing this sober. I don't need drugs to be this unhinged. I look like I do drugs, but I promise I've been clean and sober like 5 years now. I live in a better place, so I don't need them. Almost like community is the answer, and not fucking imprisonment or shit like that. Anyway, yeah, go for it, Jacob. You're free to unmute and turn on camera. Anything you want.
I'm running some late. I'm on like the home stretch of my wife's pregnancy, so I'm out on a late night grocery run. But I figured I'd hop on a little bit while I'm driving. I think I've hopped on a couple of your things before, but Libertarian Christian Institute, that's the Biblical Anarchy podcast. I don't think I need much more introduction. I think what you guys are talking about is interesting. The term paleoconservative is almost just as useless and ambiguous as Christian nationalist, because there's just like there's not a unifying definition. I guess you can look to the specific paleo strategy that Rothbard pushed out, which I have probably 50% disagreements and 50% strong disagreements with. Overall. So it's, I get where he was coming from, and I have a soft spot for some of the Christian nationalist paleoconservative types, but it's kind of like a soft spot where I'm like, hey, I understand why you're pissed off at X, Y, and Z, but your solutions not only aren't going to fix that, they're just going to make the problem worse and actually run counter to the values you claim you espouse. I mean, I think Cody kind of hit the nail on the head a little bit. If I was going to drive it home a little bit more, it would just be like, I understand that it's not ideal to go out into your streets if you have children and see a bunch of homeless people and people who are, using certain substances. Like, that's not exactly an ideal situation to be in if you're, a big family person. And I would even go as far as to say, like, yeah, like maybe in specific places, right? Maybe there's a short-term need for some kind of state intervention if things get really out of hand. But I often get the sense that the paleo strategy and Christian nationalist types and paleo conservatives, what I was saying in my comments, I think what they are really after is not to actually solve the problems in any real way. It's sort of like their solutions are widespread and go an inch deep, right? Like, they care about making the streets clean, but then the underlying problems don't go away. And then I'm like, you know what? If you were just, I don't know, a random person and not espousing any particular religion or ideology, I could probably understand that and not be too bugged by it. But when you're kind of going like, well, I'm a Christian, and you're attaching Christianity to this, I'm like, well, then shouldn't you have a heart to serve the? I don't know. I kind of remember somebody like Jesus saying that what you do to the least of these, you've done unto me. So I don't know. Maybe calling the police on Jesus isn't exactly the win that a lot of Christians think it is.
Yeah, Jesus was strictly nomadic. He was basically a bum vagrant, according to this shit. And so Rothbard was like, let me fucking, like, prosecute people exactly like that. And, like, it's funny, because when I was describing the paleo strategy, I talk with my family every week, and some of them once a month, but, like, I still keep in regular contact, and I'm, like, always talking about anarchist shit. And when I described the paleo strategy to my dad, and as soon as I said Pat Buchanan, my dad is a conservative Christian, but he still tries to stick to the Bible to a large degree, especially these days when he's directly working as an officer in the church. And let me be real specific. When I said Pat Buchanan, his fucking expression snapped to disgust and rage, because he hates Pat Buchanan. He thinks Pat Buchanan is one of the examples of people politicizing the Bible and being a false prophet. And he, like, remembers viscerally hearing all this bullshit from Pat Buchanan talking about, like, how we need to use the state, like, and vote a certain way in order to, like, be in line as a Christian nation. And he remembers just thinking this gave off, like, used car salesman kind of sleazy, slimy vibes.
Yeah, I agree. We should treat foreigners well.
Yeah.
We should definitely invoke Christian laws about treating the foreigners among us well, and including the downtrodden and whatnot. I mean, it's kind of funny. Like, a lot of these Christians don't actually read their Bibles. They have a very, like, kindergarten level understanding of the Old Testament, and they think the Old Testament was just like, and I'm not saying there's not some there's certainly some parts of the Old Testament that are rough around the edges, but there's a lot more there than what people realize that's actually pushing on the same things that Jesus later kind of pushed on, and kind of was calling attention to the Jewish people, kind of saying, hey, you guys kind of missed a lot of this shit. So I'm going to remind you what a lot of the stuff that you're kind of overlooking. And ultimately, I think that, listen, like, there's things that paleo conservatives, I like, they want to go back to an older right. And listen, like, insofar as I hate the neocons, and the paleocons are at least somewhat less statist and a little bit less, like, interventionist and a little bit less war hawkish, that, like, I can sometimes find more common ground with the paleocons and the Christian nationalists than the hardcore neocons, because the hardcore neocons, it's like, with the PaleoCon, I sit down and they're like, I want to clear the streets and I want to ban gay marriage. And then you sit down with a neocon and it's like Lindsey Graham and it's like, well, I just want to bomb shit. It's like, okay, well, I don't quite know where to go with the second one. The first one, I can at least have a conversation with them. So like they have some redeeming qualities, but ultimately I just don't think that they understand that the Christian ethos that they're trying to borrow from. Like read the Old Testament. How well did it work to try to create a moral society using law and using violence as the normative means?
Yeah, and just to be clear here, like the paleocons, the reason the paleo strategy also doesn't work is because there's something to be said for trying to avoid an interventionist foreign policy, saying that's none of our business, saying our tax dollars shouldn't be going to that, saying. But if your response to ending the wars overseas is to bring the wars home and turn America into a war zone against the political opponents and the people you deem lesser in society, then you can shove that shit right up your cunt. So, like, my whole deal is, like, I oppose these people because of the force that they represent. It's not better that they're applying the force domestically. It's more tyrannical at home then. It's not better if they say, no, we're not going to bomb, the Middle East. But that Philadelphia Move bombing, that was pretty based. Like, if they just switch the oppression from one region to another, they're no better than the other people. They just have different priorities with who they want to use their hate to justify the oppression of. And to me, that just means that they're a different breed of shit. Correct.
That's the thing I'm seeing now on Twitter is, well, I'm not going to name drop, but somebody in New Hampshire who's not necessarily, the most level-headed said, yeah, this is what Rothbard would have wanted. The Supreme Court ruled we can get rid of homeless things. Calling the cops, push them away. And I'm like, I literally typed out, they ignores my messages, but I said, look, if you just move homeless people in homeless camps, you haven't solved a homeless problem. If you call cops on them, you haven't solved it. What is causing that? I don't know. Is it inflation? Is it mental health? Is it a combination of the two? Is it the fact that maybe society is crumbling and we can actually figure out mutual aid networks and help them? Or do you just want to call in the police on homeless people? Also, there's another person who has said, and that's why we started getting in arguments, Josh Anderson, Toad, who said we're calling the cops on the homeless people. I'm like, stop. If you keep calling cops, I've seen this in Pittsburgh firsthand. You can't just call cops on homeless people and think, hey, we solved the problem, because it doesn't solve the problem.
Well, that's right. I mean, I think my ultimate issue is that it's one thing, if I was going to, I'm probably more right-wing and sympathetic to the paleo strategy and paleocons than anyone else here. And if I was going to be charitable, I would say that I can somewhat understand if there was a call in extreme situations for a short-term need to sort of institute some sort of we need to clear the streets because it's just it's not safe to go outside or something like that. But then it's okay, but if that, it's one thing to apply something as triage, it's another thing to apply something as this is just going to be our policy going forward. That's my issue. It's one thing to be in the triage of war of okay, we need to get some semblance of order on things while we move to a long-term strategy. But for a lot of these people, the long-term strategy is just to rely on the police, military, industrial complex, which is okay, well, that's weird for someone who describes himself as a libertarian.
Yeah, and two things. First off, Kareem, if you could grab some headphones. Second off, the general vibe, Joe Rogan came out with a really good point a while back, and I don't like a lot of the stuff he says now, but he was on with Jimmy Dore, who I also don't like, for a variety of reasons that maybe someday we can really delve into. But the general thing that these two were talking about was the Maui fires and how they somehow accidentally could send $6 billion to Ukraine, but they couldn't spend the $5 billion it would take to rebuild Maui. I'm so sure. They always had, they've always got money for war, never money for the poor. It's that kind of deal. It's and so like when it comes to this, there was some estimate a while back that totally addressing the homeless issue, and it's probably like about like maybe half again more because of inflation, which is, by the way, for anybody out there who's like confused, both a Trump and Biden problem. Trump added 8 trillion to the deficit. Biden, I think, added like 8 trillion of his own. I don't know. It's been a lot. And the general vibe that I want to convey is, there's $20 billion is the amount Housing and Urban Development, HUD, says it would take to completely solve homelessness. And this was like, I don't know, a decade ago. I think it was 2016. And so like Housing and Urban Development says that in 2016. It's probably something like 30 billion now. And we could do that. We could, for about that much money, for about, like the amount of money that the U.S. Has sent to Israel recently, we could send every one of the bums and vagrants to a small apartment so that they could start to get their lives on track. What's the money going to? Oh, right, yeah, Israel, or Ukraine, or Saudi Arabia, or any number of other vassal states so that they can manage a military intelligence industrial complex around the world, or to build another prison and fund the cops more so that they could have a prison industrial complex, or to build yet more mega corporate lands and steal more land with asset forfeiture, sometimes intentionally destroyed by another act so that they can make the land, worthless, so that they can be like, you know what? We'll buy this land, but now we're going to buy it for much less because it's worth so much less. But you don't even want to live here anymore, do you? Because of what we did to it. So many of just little evil examples of things that they enrich. Mega corporations and banks getting away with so much evil. And they do all of this with the money rather than spending like $30 billion to get the homeless people off the streets. Clear the streets? No. Fund the streets. Give that money back to the people instead of continually spreading it in terms of foreign adventurism. That's how we solve the fucking problem. So that's my response to those people. If those people truly actually want to solve the problem, they should recognize that the money should still go to a place for now, and it just shouldn't go to hyper-funding cops and hyper-enabling them to beat poor people. It should go to solving the problem so that the cops don't need to be called to begin with. That'd be my response. I don't know if you got any words, because you got to leave soon, I'm assuming, Jacob, but feel free to take as much time as you want to respond.
Well, I mean, I'm sort of conflicted. I mean, on one hand, I think I often do say war is my number one issue, and I often do, when I'm pleading to like anti-war lefties or normies, go like, yeah, why don't we just end all the wars and foreign funding and just invest that money domestically? Like, because that's an easy pitch, right?
Yes.
On the other hand, I'm like, okay, my libertarian side is screaming when I'm hearing that, going, yeah, but like the state's gonna completely fuck that up.
Yes.
I mean, they're gonna and there's gonna be all sorts of harms and malincentives created by that. All sorts of situations that are gonna be ripe for abuse. I mean, kind of what you were talking about earlier, how felons get jobs often because of like subsidies from government. And I can imagine, just increasing the relationship between government and people who are sort of on the outskirts of society generally ends up being good for government and bad for the people on the outskirts of society. So,
yes.
Yeah, I mean, war is so bad that any move that decreases the net total war that we're waging and decreases the empire, I'm generally down for. But like within libertarian circles, I'm like, okay, but like we have to quickly move to step 2 of like, okay, now we need to start privatizing these services and get them out of government hands as quickly as possible.
So I'll say some quick words. I'm sure other people also have words to say. But my general quick words is this. If the cops bust down your door and raid your house and fuck up your shit and scare your family, I'm I'm pretty sure it would not be unethical in your mind to demand that the cops repair the damage, that they give you enough money that the house can be repaired, that they, you know, work with your insurance company to say it was entirely our fault so that everything can get, like, sorted out, right? I think that that's a relatively good, like, response to that, is like saying, you fucked up my shit, now you gotta pay for it. And because of that, because I think we can both agree on that, and if you don't, then feel free to let me know. But because I think we can both agree to that, the secondary thing that I always say is the state is the world police. The U.S. government and its hegemonic allies conducts the world's, like, single greatest and largest empire in history. And because of that empire and its hegemonic authority, it acts like world police everywhere, kicking in doors, raiding houses, scaring families, occasionally killing them, or just bombing them, or poisoning them, or etc., etc., etc. Because of that, I don't see any problem with those people seeking restitution from the state in the same exact way. And I also don't, I see, like, the homeless people domestically as oftentimes a direct result of a very similar mentality of the U.S. just going through and destroying its corporate and bankster and everything elements of its hegemony, creating a significant amount of problems for the poor and underclass here, and creating a significant amount of these homeless people to begin with. So for me, those people seeking that same kind of restitution would not be wrong. And as a component of a transition to a stateless society, I would want an off-ramp where the government pays for all of the damages that it's done and makes people whole. And before before the privatization kicks in, the government has to do things like sell off its military bases. It has to
But
do.
doesn't that, I mean, that gives me the heebie-jeebies, because that can start to seem very familiar to, like, the communists saying, like, you know, we've achieved our political revolution and now we're going to go back and try to solve all these past injustices. I mean, like, if it's a very clear, like the example you gave, right? The police kick down your door.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there was a clear, like, yeah, like, fix the door, right? Like, make the person whole. I'm not saying I disagree necessarily with the spirit of what you're saying, but I do find that, just from my understanding of history and just also with my fear that because man has fallen, so I'm kind of bringing some of my Christian, like, mindset in here, but we're generally bad. We're past injustices that are hard to give an exact number or to exactly quantify, and then that tends to actually, I think, incentivize people and mobs of people into, like, pushing for more and more and calling for more, like the revolution doesn't die and you don't actually transition to peacetime. Kind of like if you've ever read The Hunger Games, how it's like they have the revolution and then they're like, okay, and now we need to start to oppressing the past oppressor. So I'm like, I'm not saying that's what you're advocating for, but my worry is that the good intentions of people like you who say, well, we should seek restitutions and reparations and whatnot. My concern is just pragmatically how that plays out. I generally worry that, except for dealing with immediately provable and demonstrable instances of violated property rights, like we've all been. I mean, it's almost like it's similar to the problem of economic calculation, but it's in reverse. Like we can't really calculate the degree to which we've all been economically robbed and aggressed against by the government. Like it's almost agreed to, which is an incalculable or approaching infinity, because there's an infinite number of moments almost back in time where we might have acted differently had the monetary system been differently, had inflation not existed, had trade rules not existed. I mean, there's just so many different variables.
So the first response I could give, and I'll try to keep this brief because it's not precisely like a Jacob Jeremiah exchange. So I do want to give other people some words room. and like also of course them in a chance to interface with you
Well,
with
I
any amount of time.
I gotta hop off here too, anyway. But
Well,
it was a good chat. But I'll listen to your response in the
okay.
in the stream then.
Yeah, all right. Well, thank you for coming on, and feel free to hop in. Let me know during one of these streams in the future. You can just hit me up on Twitter and say, "Hey, this sounds interesting. I want in." Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks.
So
Hi, Jacob.
the general vibe that I would say, the first thing that I would respond with is it would be a relatively easy one-to-one calculation for mate. For instance, sell a foreign military base in a place the U.S. shouldn't even be, and put that money directly into building like apartment complexes or renewing existing ones, buying ones that exist and are in perfectly fine condition but are being monopolized by cunts like BlackRock and Blackstone and Black something or other. They always name it something, Greylock Partners. They've always got these like names for their venture capital funds that I think are fucking almost universally like designed to make it sound like a Bond villain. But the general vibe is divest those things, those statist bureaucracies, and take like their stuff that they have gotten by their ill-gotten means of oppressing the common person, and like start to and I know this is going to make me sound all lefty, but I'm also an anarchist unity guy, and the left libertarians in my audience will appreciate it when I say that some of this stuff should be redistributed, because it's not like Lockheed Martin deserves what they have. It's not like Raytheon and Boeing and BAE Systems and all these people who profit off of the bloodshed actually earned what they have. So it's like, I wouldn't have a problem with, for instance, a defense contractor losing their factory and that factory land being converted into a farm, like for the use of the people. I wouldn't have a problem with one of these BlackRock like controlled properties to be divested from them so that apartment complex could house like 40 or 50 people. I wouldn't have a problem with certain ones of these things that are going to sound communist, but would actually create many more workers in an anarcho-capitalist paradigm. If you want these people to be parts of the useful and productive class, as the Paleo people claim they want, the first step is giving them a home, because nobody is going to hire them in this condition. Living on the streets, can't shower, can't like have clean clothes stored in a clean closet, can't like wake up on time because like they can't get to good sleep, can't store food so they can't eat healthily, and they can't focus during the can't day. There's so many barriers for the bum and vagrant class that are not being considered by the Paleo strategy. And to me, those people, if from a capitalist perspective they should become workers, are like, it's necessary to give them that first foundation. So what I'll say is, I think that even in a capitalist context, a little bit of this alleged communism would be helpful. So that's what I'll say to that. And Biblical Anarchy says, yeah, but then you run into the problem of human envy, which is problematic. It becomes a competition of victimhood. Well, that's why you have just a set thing that you're going to do, and you don't turn it into the Olympics. Like, everybody gets a certain amount, and like if they say that they're owed more, you just say, well, I mean, we can't do everything for everyone, and we can't go back in time and figure out all the micro injustices. So take your apartment and your better life, and most people will. Most people will. And the very few people who won't, they would probably be told to shut the fuck up and stop ruining a good thing by the people who actually did give a shit. My assumption. I'll shut the fuck up, though. I've said so many words. Y'all can say as many words as you want.
Empathize with Jacob's point, and this is probably the Christian part of myself, that human beings can be really bad at doing justice together. That we design these systems that are supposed to be good. Like, for example, when we think like, oh, well, the cops busted down your door, shot your dog, shot up your place, hurt people, they should pay for that. Okay, but they is usually the taxpayer, right? Like, I mean, Just in the current system, that's who they is when they pays for it. They should be the cop, the person who ordered the hit, the judge who said that it was warranted, the trainers. Like there's ways to hold actual people accountable for this thing, but we don't exist in that system. And so what the idea is do we just say, Jacob's kind of in this place where he pushes on one end where it's just kind of like, if we try to find justice for some people, then everybody's going to want this justice slice. And because we've all been wronged in some way, that's never going to end. But I do think there is a level between like, hey, listen, this guy molested my kids and my kids are traumatized, and I would like some recompense for that to help them through this difficult time that was done by that harm, versus this kid stepped on my property, bent a blade of grass, and I'd like $1 million, please. Like, we can call it the oppression Olympics if you want, but there is a level of being oppressed and like being hurt. And I think is the more we include, and this is why I want to bring Christianity to people, to encourage them to discuss things with the Holy Spirit or with their conscience. And even if it's not Christianity, like spiritually, I think everybody kind of comes to the same conclusion as that, of this. Like common sense people just kind of go, well, that person obviously deserves justice, and this person's being a whiny crybaby. The problem is when we try to make a legal system for that. And that's when the law goes, I don't know what to do. I need another 1,000 pages in order to somehow differentiate between getting molested and stepping on a blade of grass, right? Like, because this is why the law sucks so bad. This is why as Christians we're commanded to have the law in our hearts and not in our heads and not on pieces of paper, is because we feel that justice inside of us. And we yearn to bring that to people. Like, I think where I'm with you, well, I'm giving Jacob as much credit as I can, where I'm with you, Jeremy, is that this should absolutely be a compulsion among liberty-minded people. You will not have a peaceful society until people feel peace in their souls. And they're not going to feel peace in their souls if somebody is getting away with oppressing them and everyone around them just goes, well, is it the oppression Olympics now? Oh no. So I guess your whole this whole family says you're not allowed to eat at their restaurant. No, that sucks. Right? Like if you're not allowed to eat at a restaurant because of the color of your skin, that sucks. And you have a right to say that sucks. And now you have the right to feel dehumanized because of that. And we as people, yeah, I might not be able to steal that guy's stuff and give it to you, and because like throwing his money at the problem makes it better, but you should receive some justice for that. I think we're in a good society if we say you're not allowed to eat at that restaurant. You know what? Screw that, guys. I'm not going to eat at their restaurant either because I stand with you, because I love you so much. That's how you get justice. This is a society that can still seek justice outside of a legal system and without violating the rights of a racist. But what it does is it means being culturally Christian. Now, what's funny is Jacob and I use that word, and we often use it differently because he will recommend hop to me. And you made me read that whole book, Jacob, like my 7th Hoppa book. And I read it, and he's calling for cultural homogeneity, like this Christian sterilized culture. It's amazing. Honestly, if you replace the word commune with HOA, I could make every Hoppian a Marxist like that. Like, just paste it over. You don't even need to change like anything. They're both paranoid of foreigners. They're paranoid of alternative lifestyles. They both don't like loud music. They both don't like different kinds of food and barbecue, and artwork is really scary because it can send a message that hasn't been castrated first. Like, it is so like between these people, like, and for me, cultural Christianity is living next to a Muslim and is living across from atheists and embracing these people and their lifestyles and loving them for who they are. Like, it embraces the fact, the Gentiles, right? This to me is the origins and the culture of Christianity, is to go and diversify and find these foreign places and say, hey, if you want to join me, 100% voluntary, I think I have a better way of life for you. And as soon as you need the government to make that better way of life, you've really missed the message of Christ. So like, I guess I'm just trying to get into this system of justice thing that you're talking about, because I do, like with the paleo strategy, I understand if there's like a homeless problem and like what Jacob says, like they're immediately threatening you or something like that. But let's get to the root of the problem. The homeless are obviously an after effect of the problem.
Right.
Obviously. Like, whether it's drugs, I mean, and this is the other thing. Why don't we treat them as individuals instead of collectives? I promise if you work with them, you're not going to see homelessness as some like collective Borg. They're not all addicted to drugs. They don't all 100% have mental problems. A lot of them are just down on their luck. They all have lost somebody that they loved. Hopefully that's something we can like recognize and empathize with. And these are like good ways to bring people out of it. It's not unleashing the cops. And so with the Christian nationalists, like, I just can't do it. To me, it sounds like Christian Satanism. I just, in my head, they're not reconcilable. Stephen Wolf, thankfully, somebody, I wish I could have talked with Jacob about this, and hopefully we get an extended conversation, we can. But just the other day, like, calling for an ethno-state, and Christian, like, thankfully, Christians, like, universally rejected him. He's been on, like, this fringe Christian, like, ooh, should we get into, like, Stephen Wolf for a while now? And just, like, I think 4 days ago, literally, he went overboard and just like went this hour-long like ethno-nationalist speech. And now like, and he's been a Christian nationalist, been open Christian nationalist for a while. But it's like, this is the underbelly of it. What he presented to you before that was kind of this, what we're talking about here. Why we have such a bad taste for it. Because they don't present you the underbelly.
Right.
Like, but the underbelly is much worse. Like, what it is it's like, well, I guess I don't like the homeless, but the underbelly is hatred. The underbelly is this dislike of foreigners. So, like, of course, in his book for Christian nationalism, he does talk about, like, executing drug dealers and non-believers and heretics and all kinds of Caesarian, he actually calls it Caesarism himself. So, like, it's not me exaggerating and saying this, like, calls for Caesarism and executing innocent people, like, because they believe in the wrong faith or something. He's okay, I guess, with you being a Muslim, but you have to practice as a Christian, like, in public. Like, you must, like, present that way. It's nuts. But anyway, like, for me, the underbelly of Christian nationalism is this hatred. And so I just can't, for me, I can't reconcile this. And I understand for Jacob, it may seem a little better. Like, for me, you look at Caesar and you look at the Jews who didn't want anything to do with Caesar. Well, who is worse? Well, really, Caesar's executing millions of people and the Jews just want an ethno-state at that time. Ethno-state, okay, maybe they keep to themselves or whatever. Which one did Jesus see as a bigger problem? The ethno-state. Caesar's not supposed to be a believer. He's got no morals. He's got no standards we hold him to. That's a splinter in Caesar's eye. Where's the plank? In our eye for being ethno-nationalists, right? Like, so regardless of how we are weighing these things, this is how God weighs it. And he sees, if you're a moral people, you cannot have this immorality raging among you.
Yeah. So 3 things he responded before Jamie says words, and then Jamie can immediately say words. It's actually 4, I guess. Who determines that, though? I mean, I've never liked the who question, because I just think that if this property was illegitimately garnered, then the answer is anybody who wants to do justice should do justice. To me, it's not a who. It's like everybody has like that ability in an anarchist transition to assist that transition. That's sort of the point. It's like I don't need to dictate to a specific authority who gets what. But if it would be helpful, you could have boards set up. You could do sort of things like that. So I'll say that. He also says it's possible, I'll grant, but you got to tread carefully with where and how you draw that line is all I'm saying. Justice is super complex, especially transitioning from a statist paradigm. Absolutely. He also says, well, Hody, you're arguing not for justice there. You're arguing for a market correction, which might feel like justice, but it's not justice in a legal sense. You're describing, and he also said about the nationalist who doesn't show you the underbelly, that you're describing the Mott and Bailey, Hody. So, Jamie, because I'm pretty sure he just agrees with that, so.
So, yeah, a couple of things as I was listening to both Hody and Jacob. So, you know, I keep going back to the topic of the homeless question, you know, about calling the cops. And there was reference about, oh, you don't, if you care about family, you don't want to go out and see, you know, an IV drug user who happens to be homeless sitting in the park. Well, you know, as a parent, of course, I don't want my daughter to see the worst of humanity. And not that the homeless person is the worst, but I mean, it illustrates, you know, the bottom, right?
Right.
It shows that society has failed. But I also don't want my child naive to the ways of the world, right? It's this, the paleos almost want to sanitize the world for their preferred aesthetic, right? And you know, to wake up to sunshine every day and never see snow, green leaves, everybody is plump because they have all the food that they want, you know, I mean, that utopia, of course. But that's not the reality we live in today. It's not the reality that humans have ever existed in. And I don't want to sanitize that reality because, number one, if you're not aware of a problem, then you aren't thinking about solving problems or ways to solve problems. And that's one of the things that I've said it before, and I know a lot of anarchists have said that, is like, oh, well, how do you create this perfect world in justice? Well, you can't. You can never create a perfect world or perfect justice. You'll never have that utopia, but you've got to get rid of that. And again, I'll go back to the legalist discussion, is legalism and anarchism just don't go together in my mind. You know, you can't fix humans and human society and the ills in the world by creating legalist structures, because they've never accommodated all of the complex issues that we have created and exist with. And it really kind of binds us in ways that doesn't allow us that freedom and creativity to actually look at new ways of doing and being and working and living together. And I also, a lot of the paleos, and not just paleos, but libertarians in general, and even anarchists in a way, is they limit their thinking to the West, capitalism versus communism versus this and versus that. I mean, these are modern inventions, right? We're the last 400 or 500 years. I mean, humans have been working on ways of being and living together for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and we're going to continue doing that. And when we kind of limit our discussions to, well, if it's not this, it's communism, and if it's not this, that, it's never going to be that. We haven't had capitalism as it's described. We haven't had communism as it's described. We haven't had any of these as described. And we're not going to have anything that we're talking about today 100% as described or as we imagine, because that's just not the way humans work. That's just not the way the world works.
And I'll just say real quick before, because I'm sure Kareem's got some things to say about that, and then Dennis, I'm sure, has some things. And, there's some things building up in the chat, but, there's a certain thing to be argued for just opposing utopianism as a concept, which is what I do. I just reject it. I reject the idea that things are ever going to be perfect or even ideal. To me, that's the way to have an authoritarian society. Like, oh, things would be perfect as long as we get me in charge and we can get rid of all of those people. And, there's an account on Twitter that I would hope people follow called Against Utopia. And there's, a lot of, against utopia kind of mentalities in left anarchist circles, because the goal is not to achieve an impossible perfection, and if it is, The goal is not to achieve an impossible perfection, and if it is, then we will fail forever. The goal is to get to a better society, even if it's not perfect. Kareem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm sure you've got words to say, but if you don't...
No. I have words.
Yeah. Oh, your camera's off, by the way. I don't know if that's intentional, but other way, go ahead.
Yeah, give me 1 second. I'm just flipping it back on. I've been just sitting, listening. So, as far as this, I did outreach for a little bit in Pittsburgh. So I got to see the homeless condition. And yeah, there are some people with mental problems, but a vast majority of them just could not make rent, lost somebody they knew.
Exactly
like Hodie's saying. I think more Christians should take, I have a lot of friends who are Christians on Facebook who are always posting about this scripture, that scripture, all this stuff. But I think it'd be interesting if they took Hodie's perspective and said, look, hey, how can I help my fellow man out? What would be good for my fellow man? As opposed to like, well, I'm just going to preach to you. Same thing in the anarchist community where we're like, hey, let's just, test everybody's economic knowledge. Like, do you know everything? Do you know everything that
God, I fucking hate that
ever
shit.
Said? Yeah, can you write out equations like Rothbard and Hayek? And literally, I was talking to, now he can't do podcasts, and I don't agree with the Kenny thing, but I was talking to Bill Cox, who was my Libertarian vice chair, and I said, Bill, what do you think about the convention? And he said, I don't necessarily think it's going to be, that great, which it was okay. It was good for networking more than, the convention itself. But I said, well, Bill, I've been thinking about, with the other anarchists I've been working with on the left, they say, hey, why don't you just give a sandwich to like a homeless dude and then they'll be grateful they have food. And then they'll be open to, oh, you want him to read this or you want him to read that or you want him to get involved in this or that. And to me, that's more effective than just saying, hey, we're going to replete economics equations all day and all night and all this type of stuff. I'm not the expert here, but to me, the paleo is trying to make the quote unquote perfect world. Even though like sometimes I understand where it comes from. Okay, fine. I want a society that's functional. They even get into things that I know are not going to work. There's another guy who's like a little bit, and I used to really like this guy. I cannot remember his name. I remember his YouTube intro. He would say like, heck off, commie, John something. And he's kind of like a Nick Fuentes guy. And they're all like, oh, let's ban adult material. And I'm like, okay, look, listen. The minute you do that, people will be on proxy servers. There'll be, magazines below the thing. Oh, but let's ban, this human vice. Let's ban that human vice. So to me, I think they have just as a naive view as the liberal, which is just saying, well, I don't like these, particular things. I don't like that people do this. I don't like that people have this take on the environment per se. Let's ban it. And literally what I'm saying is I think they are just another version that creates fascism. They are at least I'll say this. They're the overt kind, so they're openly like that. And then the Democrats and like the liberals seem to be, oh no, we just want to help everybody. We just have NATO so we can make everybody safe. Woo! We just want to maintain the liberal world order. Well, what's the liberal world order, Mr. Liberal? Oh, it's domination of resources and control by the United States and its satellites. Okay, and the conservatives come out and say that. So to me, paleocons are just reactionaries, simply like the liberals, except maybe they're a little bit overt with it. And I remember the guy's name because I looked it up. His name's John Doyle. Some of his takes are okay. Some of his takes are ridiculous. And that's the problem I have is statists look at the world and say, well, I have the authority to do whatever, make society in my image because I think this is the best way people should live. And what's ironic is the elites think that too. Like if you talk to, I would wager to say, if you talk to like Bill Gates, if you talk to even like some of these higher people like Yuval Harari, yeah, some of them are straight evil, but some people just think, man, if everybody just did this, if we all just got under the UN guys, there would be peace. Can't we just all conform to this one standard? Alexander the Great tried it. The Mongols tried it. Can't we just, all, if everybody does everything like me, well, gee, the world would just be perfect.
If
And
only
really
I
think
were in charge.
Correct.
Yeah.
I think liberals and conservatives think the exact same way. Well, if everybody was just, if we just enforced this, if we just enforced all of my policies on people for an equitable society, geez, it would be better. If we just enforced all my traditional values on people, it would be a perfect society. Granted, some things I might agree with in some circumstances, but I don't agree using the power of the state, which is the issue. I don't think there is an answer to that, in the sense that some people will have traditional values regardless. Some people want to do things different ways. And if you think something is a vice, well, just be the best example you can be and accept that humans have vices. That being said, yeah, I'll look at people, I can understand. John Doyle's actually okay because he has some good points, like why conservatives can't make culture because they're not trying to. But the issue is these people always revert to the fact of, well, now we have to use state force. Now we have to use state force. We have to use state force to keep. If I were to really break down authoritarian left and right is saying we have to use fascism or state force to keep society traditional and to maybe not interfere in the market as much. The left is saying one of two things. We want to keep society beholden to the state. Like, oh, Kim Jong-un is emperor. We need to keep society beholden to some kind of authoritarian collectivist ideology, as opposed to a voluntary one. So when you can get past those two things and realize that those things will never work, and it's not a good idea, then the paleo strategy is also not a good idea.
Yeah.
So hopefully that encapsulated everything.
Reinhold.
Can I just?
Oh yeah, go.
I just briefly wanted to say, it's when we talk about bubbles and how dangerous bubbles are. As a historian, we have this concept called diffusion, right? I mean, technological advances, social advances, cultural progress, if we want to call it that. It's this idea of diffusion. You encounter new ways of doing, new ideas. And I mean, that's kind of how we have come here. It wasn't because of isolation and creation of bubbles, cultural or otherwise. It is this confrontation, this melding, this dialogue between different ways of seeing the world, different ideas, different it's just, the paleo just kind of kills that. So I thank you.
Dennis.
Good. So I'm coming a little bit late, so I don't know exactly where we're at, but
we're on plank
7.
Sounds
like we're talking. Yeah. That sounds like we're talking about, again, paleo strategy and human nature, which human nature is always an interesting thing that I think a lot of libertarians seem to fail on and misunderstand. It's like, I really wish every libertarian would just take a couple classes of sociology and understand how people really are, because I keep hearing a lot of like absolutism that doesn't mesh with the way people think, the way human beings desire to be. And there's a desire from human beings to have order. And they think that right now the way to get the order is with the state, which is, where we've gotten to where we're at now. And if you are threatening people to take away that order, they're not going to follow you or listen to you unless you can make it sense to them that they're not going to lose that. They're not going to lose the ability for them to get up and go to their jobs the next day and take care of their families the way they were, right? That sort of introduction of chaos is what scares a lot of people. And like I've always said, is the only way to actually get around that is just to prove the case by going out and putting those institutions in place now. and show that the state isn't needed in those areas. Like the best example I've always used for that is Underwriters Laboratories. We don't need to have regulation in the electronics market because Underwriters Laboratories did a good job, so there was never a need for it. Why can't we do that with all the other things that currently that people are looking to the government to solve? Let's find a way to do it without it and show that it's not needed. So,
yeah, sure.
That's my take on that. But as far as the paleos go, the paleos are really just a reach out to the old right to say who want a single culture and abhor multiculturalism. And multiculturalism is how we grow and become better by taking the better pieces. It's supposed to be the marketplace of ideas, and the paleo strategy wants to eliminate that marketplace. Right? Mm-hmm. They always end up trying to limit the market while claiming they want to free the market. Not just economics, but every other market, the labor market. They want to eliminate, lock it down and say, we want to have this type of labor market. We don't want these people coming in and driving the cost of wages down, which would then lower the cost of prices and goods. But they don't see it that way. They see it more as a culture issue, and then they enforce their rules on that market. They do the same with the marketplace of ideas. They want to lock it down to say it should only be the Western European culture is the best one, and therefore we should all just live under that one, and everybody should follow the way we think. And what I find with fascism is that it's usually, as I've been studying it, it's usually a reactionary response. The rise of fascism is a reactionary response to an increasing left wing of gaining power in the society. It's just like a reaction to that. They want to pull back and bring us back to where it was always better, which was never really ever better. But they always think it was. It's the golden age rule.
Right.
So
and in that regard, because like the next plank that we'll be moving to, this is sort of like a finale-ish thing, but the next plank we'll be moving to is plank 8, which to me, we just got done with America First, and we made a brief mention of the fucking like homeless thing because of the recent Supreme Court fascism. First off, before we divert from America First, let me just say that America First has been a fascist slogan in America anyway for a really long time, and in a document where he was directly supporting David Duke and Pat Buchanan, that's hella sus, if you catch my drift. And additionally, it's currently, if we took it to the modern extent, literally a news network for Nick Fuentes, the Nazis. So I don't care about, like, anybody who says America First is automatically going to be a little bit sus to me, because, like, I follow fascist trends and I learn from history, and I'm not willing to let that shit go. So I don't like that anyway. But now we're on to plank 8, which is fucking dystopian in context. So, plank 8. I'm going to read this. I'm going to read it paragraph by paragraph, and then people can say their words about it. Defend family values, which means get the state out of the family and replace state control by parental control. In the long run, this means ending public schools and replacing them by private schools. But we must realize that voucher and even tax credit schemes are not, despite Milton Friedman, transitional demands on the path to privatized education. Instead, they will make matters worse by fastening government control more totally upon the private schools. Within the public school system, the only sound alternative is decentralization and back to local community neighborhood control of the schools.
Basically the Soviet that was created in the 1920s in Russia, right?
Yeah.
The local control of everything. Soviets were.
Yeah. It's almost like this is a model for authoritarianism. See, I was hoping somebody would catch on to that sort of thing. Like, decentralization is oftentimes just a veneer for getting more control, like, for yourself, and less control for the minorities. That's like a very Hoppian way to think. Anybody else got words before I proceed?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Hope.
Well, I'll just say, because it actually banks off something that you said, was that, like, for some Christians, because, you know, our faith doesn't want us to have homelessness. So for some Christians, to them, oh, it's family values to have the cops sweep the homeless off the streets. But to some Christians, the Christian culture then is to feed them, heal them, nourish them, and treat them until they have homes, right? Like, help them. Like, to me, the failure isn't that my kid sees evil. It's that my kid sees evil and knows what to do. Like, you know, that this is the culture. Like, to me, family values, I love family values. I live a rather family value oriented, ethic filled life. My kids certainly know my ethics, right? Like, we don't lie, we tell the truth, we don't judge, we love people before, you know, that even if we don't understand them very well. Like, these are family values. When you're giving me David Duke, literally in this thing where you're talking about family values, what values you're talking about? You're talking about the value of segregating my kids? That's an anti-Christian, anti-family value. Like, this is a shut down hate value. You know, like, don't Pat Buchanan and then just be like, and these are the guys to turn to who could be the leaders in instilling those loving family values in your home. No way. Like, just, to me, it makes me sick. I really can't stand when people, it's using my God's name in vain. Mm-hmm. Is when they talk about these family Christian values. Like, this is the ultimate in using God's name in vain to me.
And that's the thing too, is what do they mean by family values? It's a phrase you throw out. It's kind of like America First. You throw out a phrase that everybody's going to interpret the way they want it to be interpreted, and they're going to then put their own spin on what they think that means, but they'll follow you for it because you're just saying the words that they want to hear.
Well, whose family?
Yeah. I mean, is your family values, that only a man and a woman can raise a family? So you're going to outlaw homosexual marriages? Well, yeah, that's called upon in a lot of documentation, including Project 2025. They actually specifically call that out. And when you start getting into these family values, it's family, white, Christian, Western, European, historical values.
Cis
right?
heteronormative.
That's what they're really trying to say. Yeah, they're not going to let you have any other, interpretation of that phrase.
Yeah, and we'll be getting into the thick of that in the next paragraph too. Jamie, go for it.
Yeah, no, I was going to echo a lot of that same thing. Is, when I think of family values, it is centered in love, but that love means different things and is expressed differently by different people, and by just packing something into saying, family values doesn't say a lot, but it says a lot, That's, I think, what troubles me.
It's like, here's your fucking branding.
Yeah. Like, this is the way you must love. And that's, I think, the point that Reinhold was making, and Hody too. Like, love can only be defined this way and expressed this way by these particular entities for it to actually fit in family values. And I don't see the world that way at all.
Right. And so the next paragraph, like, unless you want to say something, Kareem, it seems like you probably I don't know. Feel free.
All right. So what I'll say with this is interesting to me. I agree with the public school thing. I'll say that. That's the issue is, though, with all this, it's kind of murky because they say something you like. They're like, no public schools. They're like, come on, libertarians. I feel like this is the Trump thing. Like, we'll pull out of Afghanistan. Come on, man. It's cool. Hey, Malay said, Viva Libertad Carajo. Isn't that cool, man? Let's apply for NATO. It's like, wait, what? Whoa. Hold on. There's like extra stuff here that's really bad. So this is not it would just be easier to say, hey, family values. Treat people the NAP. Get rid of public schools. All right, cool. I don't have for the record, I was the one person in the comments when Vladimir Putin's like, trans people shouldn't adopt kids. I'm like, listen, even if you don't think that's the ideal thing for a kid, wouldn't it be better for them if they were orphaned to have trans parents and not, no, he's based. No, Putin's based. Okay. I mean, I didn't convince them, obviously. But to me, the issue I have with family values, when conservatives do it, it's not just family values. They take it a step further and it becomes authoritarian to say, we want family values, but we're going to dictate exactly how we want the family structure and how we want everything done. And yeah, I'm not a fan of America First because, not even if it's a fascist phrase or not, some people use it for fascism, some people use it for nationalism, some people do use it just to be patriotic. Okay, I like America, fine. There's no problem I have with that. But I'm a communalist, and I'd say, hey, to me, your nation is your community. So those two things.
Yeah. And also, this is the next paragraph. And here's where it's going to start to really sink in how fascist this document is. Okay? Further, we must reject once and for all the modal libertarian view that all government-operated resources must be cesspools. We must try, short of ultimate privatization, to operate government facilities in a manner most conducive to a business or to neighborhood control. But that means that the public schools must allow prayer, and that we must abandon the absurd left atheist interpretation of the First Amendment that establishment of religion means not allowing prayer in public schools, or a creche in schoolyard, or a public square at Christmas. We must return to common sense and original intent in constitutional interpretation. So what he's basically doing is he's starting to enable the mentality that is leading, for instance, Louisiana and Oklahoma to start passing bullshit like the teachers must teach the Bible in school, and also that the the 10 Commandments have to be on the wall. These are things that just got passed in 2 states. Like, that's where you tell those people to go fuck themselves, but this is considered a family value in like the direction of turning these places into not cesspools, having the Bible be a thing that they like include. And like when he says that, oh, but it should be allowed, what he's actually saying by saying that, while also saying they shouldn't be allowed to be cesspools, is the Christianity, this conservatism, needs to overtake the previous cultures. It needs to be allowed to like turn government-run facilities into these institutions of family values. So I've said my words on that. Everybody can start to say what they want to about that, but I just think that this is like his sorts of little inroads into Pat Buchanan's version of theocratic bullshit, like the fascist bullshit of like calling David Duke a Christian and then saying that his mentalities should be the way that these things are, and a variety of other shit, including like supporting George H.W. Bush at the time, which I keep telling people he was doing. They don't believe me at first, and then I say, well, did you read his paleo strategy actually and fully, and the speech that he gave, and you can find it on Mises? No, I didn't. Well, then that's why you're wrong about this, because he was like all these conservative authoritarians, those were who he was supporting at the time. So anyway, y'all can say words.
All right, I can go real quick. The first thing that he says in here that is wrong is the return of the original interpretation of the Constitution by our founding fathers. Most of our founding fathers were deists. They did not want religion to be taught in schools or whatever he's considering that to mean.
Yep.
They wanted to make sure that people had the choices to go the way they wanted to go. They didn't want to feel beholden to that sort of thing. And the other part is that he's saying that there's only one right religion that we should be supporting as a nation. Well, maybe not. Maybe it's a different, what happened to the marketplace of ideas? Maybe there's a different religion that people will want to gravitate to as opposed to Christianity. And, I'm not saying that there is one, but are Jews automatically wrong then? Or how about Muslims? Are they automatically wrong then? Should they be yeah, I'm a Taoist. Does that mean I'm persona non grata, not doing the right thing, believing the right things that I'm supposed to as a good American?
Your family doesn't count as values.
Right. So the frustration part there is that he's, once again limiting markets as they claim not to want to do, and determining what's best for everybody else. And that was the whole idea of this country, was that wasn't, we were supposed to be a place where people who were getting persecuted for their religious views to go and practice freely and not have to worry about the state dictating what they're supposed to believe and think. Exactly. And now they're wanting to do exactly that. We didn't want a king either, and now we actually have a king. So that's a whole different story, but we can move past that.
Oh, yeah, because the new Supreme Court decision that gives the president immunity from any fucking, when I keep saying, and it's not even just a king, it's just literally a Führer. Because, like, a king has a crown and a court and shit. And, like, if you cut off one head, there's not an immediate line of bullshit that can just, like, drill us down into 800 people. Like, like, not to say that you should cut off the head of a king. I'm just speaking hypothetically. But, like, it's fascism.
One thing I want to do... Yeah, one thing I want to say is that Project 2025, you probably want to do a series on that. Yeah. Because Project 2025 is a literal 1,000-page document, manifesto, and plan of implementing the Paleo strategy.
Well, and a fascist form of it, too. Like a directly fascist form.
It's literally the unitary executive theory. And we now have people on the bench, thanks to, the... what's in the Judicial Society? I can't remember the name of it. The Federalist Society.
Yeah.
All these people kept putting these people forward for judgeships, indoctrinating them into the executive unitary theory, and we have now just fully implemented with that Supreme Court decision.
Yep. Yeah. So, y'all are free to say words. No.
I just wanted to comment that I don't know if it was because Hody was on the call and we started out talking about Christianity, but I mean, when we talked about 7 and 8, I mean, it's ironic how often we talked about how it seemed to be sanitized and in this preference for a specific worldview, belief set, notion or idea of what a good society is. And I mean, it is summarized right here. We talked about, that white Western Christian, and it's a very specific Christian, I'm sure, in their mind. So I just wanted to comment that we touched on this, on all of these things, and ultimately, it's spelled out here in the last one.
If you have to mandate my faith has failed.
Yes.
Prayer should be something that our human hearts want to do. And one of the things that I least want to do is then mandate it and put it in public schools. Public schools are a place that children associate with slavery, work, bullying, hatred, anger, unreasonable expectations, judgment, unhealthy social situations. Oh, let's throw God in there too. No, absolutely not, teachers. I do not want you teaching my faith. Now, I understand if we're talking like voluntary schools, and he did specify that these are like private schools or whatever they may be, that we're in a little bit of a different situation. But he's like, hey, listen, like the here from there isn't school vouchers, which, by the way, it actually has been, and seems to be pretty good, like halfway for people to kind of get on the way. The left, for the first time ever, people who register as Democrats, for the first time ever in the last 2 years, are now for school choice, like per poll. Now, a lot of this has to do with right wings seizing their local school boards, of course, but that's a great eye-opening moment. And that's something we should reach out and encourage them with, is to be like, hey, you don't like it when the right wing controls your school board. It kind of sucks, doesn't it? Does it suck when atheists control your school board and then they outlaw the Bible? Or when Christians control your school board and they outlaw the theory of evolution? Of course. Like, all this sucks. People controlling your education sucks. But the first and foremost victim here is the child. I don't care if it's a parent doing it. I don't care if it's a teacher doing it. I don't care if it's a king doing it. Tyranny is tyranny, and oppression is oppression, and suppressing information is suppressing information. It's not evil just because who's doing it. There are levels here, of course, that you abuse your authority. Sure. But it's still evil. The evil is still evil. And so what we want to do is give our kids the maximum amount of information as possible. Ron Paul has this quote, and he didn't live up to this fully, but I love this quote because he says, I don't think abortion should be illegal. I think it should be unthinkable. Because if you are considering having an abortion, that means all your family is judging you, and you don't feel free around them. It means that everybody who should support you financially has abandoned you, and that should never happen. You should be so excited when you're pregnant to bring somebody into this world, as opposed to being afraid or worried or scared. It should be unthinkable. I want prayer to be the same way. I don't want some teacher to go, bow your heads. We're going to do this right now, some organized structure. Jesus didn't even specifies right before giving the Lord's Prayer, I don't really like doing this because how you're praying is supposed to be personal, but I'll give you a rough outline. I do like the Lord's Prayer, but it's supposed to be personal. This is why everything in the Lord's Prayer is general, right? Like, for whoever sinned against us, or forgive me for whatever I did. He doesn't say specifically. But you, instead of saying it generally, are supposed to say it very specifically. I want children voluntarily in prayer, to associate prayer not with the things that public schools represent, or even private schools represent. I want them to do it because they have a relationship with God, a wonderful, beautiful relationship with God. And that's not going to be something that they can teach or mandate. That's going to be something that's from within, something that the Holy Spirit puts on their hearts. If me as a Christian, if I'm doing my job right, I'm not in the halls of Congress. I'm at your front door with a casserole. This is the best way if you really want kids to have a relationship with God.
Yeah, and it's general sins. It's forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. It's not like forgive this one specific sin, like that sweater that Josh Anderson wore for his campaign pictures. So the general. So this thing finishes off, and we'll probably wrap it around 2 hours. And then we'll move on. Maybe we'll do Project 2025 next, because honestly, that does sound like an interesting series to get our cocks into. Even the women, their cocks as well. We all have our own intellectual cock that we can thrust into this subject. And the last paragraph here, I think, really sums up the vibe. So far, every one of these right-wing populist programs is totally consistent with a hardcore libertarian position. But all real-world politics is coalition politics, and there are other areas where libertarians might well compromise with their paleo or traditionalist or other partners in a populist coalition. For example, on family values, take such vexed problems as pornography, prostitution, or abortion. Here, pro-legalization and pro-choice libertarians should be willing to compromise on a decentralist stance, that is, to end the tyranny of the federal courts and to leave these problems up to states and, better yet, localities and neighborhoods, that is, to community standards. Now, this is the kind of thing that I've been talking about, because no, in fact, moving away from the federal government does not necessarily, decrease tyranny. It just means that if you do have tyranny, it's on a more localized level. So, if your locality wants to ban a certain type of thing, they could get away with that, as long as that locality had enough people there that wanted to persecute the minority. And there would be no checks and balances from an external party that says, because you received a certain amount of resources or material support or something from us, you cannot, in fact, say that it's okay to ban trans people in public spaces or some shit like that. The fact that it's decentralized from the federal government does not mean that it is decentralized from power, and it oftentimes still means that the power is just as powerful as ever, and does not, in fact, create the environment for freedom, does not, in fact, create the environment for liberty, does, in fact, create the environment for a total tyranny in your local community. So, for me, for my money, this thing where he's, appealing to that, that's automatically sus as fuck. And typically, if we don't get rid of the statist culture that permeates this whole fucking shit, it's not going to help that you're localized with your statism. It's still going to be statism, and in fact, in many ways and cases, it might be worse. Like, especially if you're a minority in a conservative environment, like trans people in Louisiana, for instance. You know, so it's not necessarily a hardcore libertarian position, and anybody who insists that it is being extremely myopic, because they're rightoids and they don't care about a certain type of tyranny as long as it's the type of tyranny that they get to benefit from. And then the next thing I'll say, is because of all of this, they don't want to say we're going to coalition with the left. They don't want to say we're going to compromise with the left. They've spent this whole time saying that we're not going to compromise with the left on anything, and that's okay, and David Duke, please let me suck you off. It's like that mentality has been permeating this whole fucking time. So when they then switch finally to saying that these are community standards of family values, what they're saying is you should force people in your communities, in your local communities, to live your way, and if they don't, you should be able to use force against them. And that, to me, is fucking fascist evil of the highest degree. But y'all are free to tell me if I'm just screaming about fascism again. I've been accused of that.
Hey, man, you're just screaming about fascism. Why can't you just be a nice, chill dude? Malay is, helping Argentina. He's a friendly dude. He's not trying to apply for NATO. There's a funny little quote, there's a thing someone posted. They said Americans hate communism because they were raised to be fascists. I'm like, hey, that makes a whole lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of people hate it, but I'm like, all right, define communism. They're like, well, I think it's what woke people do, or it's what rainbow flag, or it's the Soviet Union. But they never. I'm like, so Bakunin, Kropotkin, how does that fit in your equation? Like, I don't know who that is.
Right.
Interesting, because those people. Funny enough, it's ironic. I'm not like a scholar of those people. You know more Bakunin than I do, but Bakunin is actually pretty advocate of traditional values himself, which is interesting. So is Kropotkin. I know that. Okay, so for the local thing, first I was like, yeah, just do local stuff. And I'm like, okay, that might be a problem, but I don't completely disagree with it. I guess what people on the left call it is a horizontal power structure, which I can get down with. Horizontal power structures that work with other horizontal power structures. And really all horizontal power structure is a village that, yes, gets together and engages in direct democracy. I don't think that's perfect either, by the way. I'm not making like an advocation like, oh, horizontal power structures will take away all tyranny and there'll be utopia. But I am saying if you can create like actual, like the reason they call them dual power structures is because they hold some type of power, then yes, I think it's possible that you horizontally align a village of people who are for indigenous values or for LGBTQ values or for whatever else it is, so that they do have their own community to fight back. I do think the one thing is the federal government, say the federal government's being tyrannical, just say, I'm tired of paying taxes, I just can't afford it, you're inflating my money, all this stuff. If the Federal Reserve was local, there wouldn't be a Federal Reserve. I'd get some rednecks together and some things would occur and some magic would happen. But since the federal government is away from it all and it's a much, much bigger institution, it makes it harder to fight. If there's just a few rednecks being racist, I'm not saying that's good. Or if there's a few folks being authoritarian from the church. Let's put it this way. I don't think anybody here is a fan of the Westboro Baptist Church. I don't think most Christians like the Westboro Baptist Church. I think Hody would agree with me on that. But they're organized too. You know, the Westboro Baptist Church is in multiple places in America, but they don't have any institutional power. So what I'm saying is you make dual power structures that are effective in defending indigenous folk, minority, whatever it might be, and they decide on policy through direct democracy and liquid choice and ranked choice voting. And then also in turn with that, they're going to be racists in the society. There'll always be people who don't like trans people, who don't like ethnic minorities, who don't like that. But you want to make sure they don't have institutional power. Then I'm okay with keeping it local, because as far as I'm concerned, if the government isn't local, like Bookchin does make the statement, hey, the problem is people are doing slogans. They're doing America first, MAGA. I haven't seen any Build Back Better hats, but maybe there is. Hope and change back in the day. I don't know what the heck George Bush's was. I don't care. He sucked.
Mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished.
1,000 points of light.
Every time
No child left behind.
Yeah, no child left behind.
Think of the children.
Yes. Lovely. The authoritarian dog whistle. But every time you make some kind of modicum out of like, oh, we're going to do slogans are good for sports teams. I like watching soccer, but they're not good for, okay, how are we going to decide issues in a community? Why is there fluoride in my water? Why is there atrazine? Why are there other issues? Do we want to use Roundup? These are actual discussions, like social ecological discussions we should have at a town hall, and that we should establish maybe some policy on. And I don't think that's particularly a bad thing. But if you're not involved in voting on policy directly, and if you're not in your local government voting, to me, it's not your government. It's just somebody else running things, claiming to represent you. I don't think John Fetterman represents me. He hasn't said a single thing to me that I like, that I've heard. Yet he's my representative, which is ironic.
Yeah, well, and hey, just you know, because I gotta say, certain people who are, like, let's just say, running a board that is declining people who were elected. And you know, those people may be having issues with accepting the actual representatives who were chosen by the people who are allegedly represented by them, you know, in both Wisconsin for one side and Michigan for another. You know, like that corruption tango stream we did a little bit back. But, you know, the general vibe, okay, so here's the thing. First off, everybody should move to Spokane. We have really green energy here. We have large amounts of it that are directed by hydropower because of the local river, which means that a significant amount of our power is just green, and the rest of it is powered through local, like, I think net zero emission, natural gas through Avista. Additionally, we have fucking, no fluoride in our municipal water because that shit sucks, and nobody here wants that. So it's not in the local water, and I checked the water quality reports and found out that it's some of the best quality water fucking anywhere. So if y'all want to come and help do a libertarian takeover of Spokane, let's fucking do it. Second thing is, the general thing that I would say to that, in response to the localism thing, is you have to have the culture before you give people that local authority. It's sort of like you have to have the culture before you do the privatization thing. Because if all you're doing is saying, yeah, sure, private property should be protected and allowed, a lot of the people who got their private property the way that it is got it through statist means. And in like a similar vein, a lot of the people who are currently encouraging the state are doing so because they like want a slice of that authority, or they want it to represent them by crushing their opponents. So those people are building the culture that maintains and enables the state, and it's not going to be better at a local level. In fact, it might even be worse. Rothbard talks a big game about localism in one paragraph, but in just the previous fucking paragraph, in the next fucking paragraph, he's talking about the First Amendment. So the First Amendment to the, Constitution of the United States? If that didn't exist because you defederalized, congratulations, you lost that fucking protection. You can no longer cite free speech in a state that decides against it because they don't like them trans. You can no longer decide against, you can no longer get protections if your local community that divested from your state doesn't like them blacks. You can no longer do that if your county, which divested from the entire country, says, we don't like them Jews. You can't do that if your people don't have the cultural consensus of freedom first. So it's not America first we need. It's not family values we need. It's freedom values. Everything else needs to be secondary to that.
Yeah. So what kind of summarized my whole feeling about the paleo strategy and kind of how the notion of localism bothers me, because I am like, all politics is local, community, community can be very, very small. It can be very large. I mean, it depends on what kind of community you're talking about.
Like the 600,000 people here in Spokane. Sorry, I'm like Spokane's tourism board for the entire fucking country. Go ahead.
Yeah, but and that's exactly what I mean by this idea. And again, I know it's more HAPA than anything, but I mean, like the HOA. First of all, everyone to do it voluntarily has to come into it voluntarily, agree to the terms. But as an anarchist, you can't build permanent hierarchies where there is power embedded, right?
Mm-hmm.
Power over an individual. When you talk about an HOA, it's collective power. You may have gone into it voluntarily with full consent, but that's at the moment that you've given consent. Is it perpetual consent? Is it for the next generation?
Yes.
And these are things that people just don't think deeply enough. And if you have these types of communities of collective power, how often is it renegotiated? Who gets to renegotiate, right? Is there an out clause? And it goes back to my distaste of legalism. Yes, I believe in private property. What's mine is mine, what's yours is yours. And I can respect that. But when it is defined in such narrow terms, and legalism is the way, or contractualism in this case, you have to, by nature, embed this with power.
Mm-hmm.
Again, going in with consent, perfectly fine, but it can't be in perpetuity, because that's how people take and claim power and exert that authority over you.
Please keep talking for an amount of time no less than 180 seconds while I pull something up. More than if you want.
I am going to, now that you've put the pressure on me, I don't know if I can say one word.
Yeah, right?
Okay, good. But
I can continue on with the HOA.
Yeah, please.
Because it's literally federal feudalism, right? I mean, if you belong to an HOA, you don't own your property. You're contractually leasing your property. If you change your mind about the rules that the HOA have set in stone, they can force you to move, sell your property, and
yeah.
Right. So how, like, if I had a conversation with someone who was pushing Hoppian beliefs years ago, and this is what really opened my mind to it. Was I said, what happens if you sign an agreement to be in an HOA with the rule that, there's no homosexuality allowed, and you find out that your son is gay, right? What happens? You can't legally live there anymore. They will make you sell your house. And his response was, if my son came out and he was gay, I would kick him out of the house myself. Right. So I was like, okay, well, here's the mindset of the people who are pushing this, because they want to enforce those views on to other people in their community, as it were. But that was the literal option. The only option that he had in that situation would be to literally move out of the HOA environment. And they says, well, you signed a contract. You agreed to it. I'm like, yeah, you agreed to not literally own your property.
So
and that's the reality of it.
Yeah, and let me read from Democracy, the God That Failed, and talk about for a second why I firmly believe that this document is a document of culturally homogenous fascism. Because this document says, the book, the enforcement of a covenant is largely a matter of prudence, of course. How and when to react and what protective measures to take requires judgment on the part of the members of the community, and especially the proprietor and community elite. Thus, for instance, so long as the threat of moral relativism and egalitarianism is restricted to a small proportion of juveniles and young adults for only a brief period of life until they settle back into family-constrained adulthood, it may well be sufficient to do nothing at all. The proponents of cultural relativism and egalitarianism would represent little more than temporary embarrassments or irritations, and punishment in the form of ostracism can be quite mild and lenient. A small dose of ridicule and contempt may be all that is needed to contain the relativistic and egalitarian threat. The situation is very different, however, and rather more drastic measures might be required once the spirit of moral relativism and egalitarianism has taken hold among adult members of society, among mothers, fathers, and heads of households and firms. As soon as mature members of society habitually express acceptance or even advocate egalitarian sentiments, whether in the form of democracy, majority rule, or of communism, it becomes essential that other members, and in particular the natural social elites, be prepared to act decisively, and in the case of continued nonconformity, exclude and ultimately expel those members from society. In a covenant concluded among proprietor and community tenants for the purpose of protecting their private property, no such thing as a right to free or unlimited speech exists, not even to unlimited speech on one's own tenant property. One may say innumerable things and promote almost any idea under the sun, but naturally no one is permitted to advocate ideas contrary to the very purpose of the covenant of preserving and protecting private property, such as democracy and communism. There can be no there can be no tolerance toward Democrats and communists in a libertarian social order. They will have to be physically separated and expelled from society. Likewise, in a covenant founded for the purpose of protecting family and kin, there can be no tolerance toward those habitually promoting lifestyles incompatible with this goal. They, the advocates of alternative, non-family and kin-centered lifestyles, such as, for instance, and this is where it gets real hairy, individual hedonism, parasitism, nature-environment worship, homosexuality, or communism will have to be physically removed from society too if one is to maintain a libertarian social order. So, these things right here, first off, nature-environment worship. That's great. You can't advocate for environmentalism. Homosexuality. If you're born homosexual, they have the right under this libertarianism to not only mock you for it as a kid, treat you like utter dog shit, but then eventually expel you from society. That's fascism. This is all fascism. If you cannot advocate certain ideas, if they are not willing to interface with certain ideas, if they are not willing to debate you on certain ideas and allow you the use of your own property, because let's be clear, You don't own your own property. That's why you don't have unlimited speech, because it's not fucking yours. It belongs to somebody else. This is literally the same kind of thing that these ANCAP fucks are totally okay jacking off about the World Economic Forum about. You will own nothing and be happy. You will be subordinate to our capital class. You will be subordinate to our, like, rich people who have decided that this property will be controlled and used in a very specific property protecting way. You'll do that. And you'll be happy. And if you express yourself as an adult, if you do anything but your youthful indiscretion of saying things that we disagree with, you're kicked out. That's evil.
He used the term. He used the. I mean, he was using tenant. I mean, that's the harken back to feudalism.
Yes.
He was using the elite. This is the. I don't see anything in here as libertarian. I don't understand any libertarian that looks at this and says, this is exactly what we're talking about.
You have right-wing
none of
populists.
that.
I think that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I mean, it does not resemble any libertarianism that I have ever encountered. I mean, except in Hoppe's world and in this new crop of ANCAP world. It just, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that somewhat wraps it up, because I really honestly kind of think that the Hoppian thing there that he just said is sort of the natural conclusion of the paleo strategy. It's let the property owners control everything. Let those people ban anybody who even thinks differently. Get your cultural homogeneity and your ideological lockstep. And then maybe we'll have a high trust enough and low time preference enough society that we can have freedom. So I think Kareem probably has something to say about that. Let's start doing general closing statements, and you can do as long as you want. We'll start with Kareem.
All right, thanks. It sounds like the whole degenerates get forcibly removed into the ocean. And of course, I feel like he's
sorry,
McCarthyism, like,
real
oh my
quick.
God.
Real quick, my internet fucked up for a second. Continue.
Sorry.
Start there.
What happened?
Continue. Just restart from the beginning. Yeah.
Connection issue. Sounds like the whole degenerates get forcibly removed into the ocean garbage, which I don't care for. The only way I think people should get pushed into the ocean is if they want seasteading, and you help them through mutual aid to accomplish that. That being said, yeah, it's the whole idea of, hey, if we just exclude the right people and have rich white or rich upper class people, even if regardless of ethnicity, dictating everything, yeah, this will come down to corporatism again, which is what they say they're against. Also, it's ironic to me that everybody has this McCarthy, ghost or this virus that says, oh my God, communism's scary. Meanwhile, they've never read communism. Everything they don't like is communism. I feel like a lot of people are like James Lindsay on Twitter. They're just like, the drive-thru got my order wrong. Must be communism. Hey, it rained today. Must be like, okay. It's like blame Obama, blame Trump for everything. It's just communism's bad. Okay. And what's ironic is they're against communism, supposedly. But they're for institutions like the police. The for state socialist institutions or state capitalist institutions. I guess they're used interchangeably, like the police, like the military-industrial complex sometimes, if it puts on a more nationalistic flavor. They're also for authoritarians as well. They don't mind authoritarianism as long as it's done their way. So if we can get rid of this quote-unquote red scare that really doesn't have any basis in reality, in my opinion, I'm not a fan of the Marxists either. To be honest, I think Marx fails. If you watch Keith's recent not recent podcast, but 2 podcasts back. He explains why Marxism fails because of elite theory, and I will agree because of lack of signaling and redistribution, and you can't centrally plan an economy. I don't believe that. So he's right there. The problem is there's a whole lot more left philosophies than just Marxism. And if they can get off this communism, Marxism, and see that there's a lot more theory and there's a lot more practical applications there. And for the record, if we want to talk actual anarchism, whether you think it's succeeding or not, as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, there are more autonomous zones based on Bookchin's ideas, which is why I became a fan. And there's more autonomous zones, communes based on left-wing theory in general than there are right-wing theory. That doesn't mean I'm against Chiron. That doesn't mean I'm against Kospaya back in the past. I think medieval Iceland's good to study. But if we look now, there are more left-wing decentralized autonomous organizations. And people say, oh, well, this doesn't work perfectly. Oh, well, somebody got in a fight. Somebody was this. Somebody got harassed. Like they're always pulling the bad stuff up about Rojava or the bad stuff up about the Zapatistas. And I'm saying, look, the Zapatistas fought for 50 years for independence. Don't think it's going to be just, a magical utopia. It's going to take time to build up. That's my response to this stuff. The whole we can reshape society in the way we want is no better than the liberals or conservatives. And that's my biggest problem with Hoppe. There's some good things out of Hoppe. That's my biggest problem. And on top of that, I don't think just crying about, if we just get rid of all communists, magical things will happen. Well, they did that with Pinochet. They got rid of all the commies. Did society get better? No. He still used rampant violence against the civilian population. Fascists are no better than, in my opinion, than state capitalists or authoritarian communists or Marxist Leninists. Because, again, elite theory, power just goes upwards. So they're just going to say, hey, now I have the power to use violence against these people. So I don't think any of them are based. The only reason I think people say they're based in conclusion is because they don't interfere with the market so much, so people maybe get a better life. So they're like, oh, Francisco Franco wasn't that bad. I ate every day. Okay, but he's still an authoritarian. And that's my point is, oh, well, Pinochet wasn't that bad. The economy was okay. Yeah, because he left the economy alone somewhat. But because he didn't really understand how to run an economy, and I don't think anybody should run an economy. That being said, they're just as bad, if not worse, because people give people a pass or fascists. I think they're doing it now. I think we live, to me, it's not an economic system. It's actually bad, like fighting capitalism, communism, socialism, stuff like that. To me, it's the centralization of these things into the hands of a few people. If you take away that stuff, like, are you against socialism? Democratic socialism, yeah. I'm against Bernie Sanders. But I'm not particularly against libertarian socialism, which is you voting on policy. Am I against communism? Marxism, Leninism, yeah. But I'm not against people setting up communes and saying this is public property here we all use, and this is private or personal property in their case. Are you against capitalism? Well, in the American sense of this corporatism structure, yes. In Mussolini's thing, even though he started as a syndicalist, yes, I'm against that. But I'm not against free markets that are completely decentralized. So if you keep it decentralized, and if you keep it voluntary, it tends to work well on a local community level. And you can find me on Anarch Unity and Kareem6633 on Twitter, and also on the Essential Libertarians. I just finished a podcast. It took a while to edit because my StreamYard was a little bit Comcast internet's up and down, but I did a podcast with the skeptical leftist Corey Johnston, and he also put out a bunch of shorts. I did put that out, so that's there if you want to check it out. We talked about a bunch of stuff.
All right, let's go to Jamie.
So I am an anarchist without pronoun, prefix, or suffix. When I think of libertarianism, the first thing that comes to mind is the the individual is the smallest minority, right? I think we get in trouble when we try to social engineer. I don't care from what school, from what side, whether it's the left tangent or the quadrant, the upper quadrant, the lower quadrant, right or left, it doesn't matter. When we try to engineer society, I think we fail, because we interact as individuals, and we interact hundreds of times in a day or a week with other individuals, and somehow we negotiate these interactions peacefully, for the most part, for most of our lives. And so I think that's where the libertarian philosophy needs to be applied, is how an individual interacts with their fellow. And Kappa or the Paleo strategy, all of these things are really trying to create a utopia for a subset. And it's a subset, a collective, a group. And this is for individuals, right? Every human being on this planet needs to have the freedom to live their life how they see fit, so long as they are not stealing, enacting violence, etc., etc.
Absolutely.
So the Paleo strategy is trash.
Hody.
Right up there with communist fascism.
Love thy neighbor as thyself. People know that one. Who's my neighbor? Your enemy. The foreigner. The guy who's beat up and bleeding on the side of the road. The poor guy. People asked and re-asked Jesus, are you sure that's who you mean by neighbor? Yeah. He said it over and over again. I'm sure about it. So who's your neighbor? Is it the cops? Or is it the homeless guy they're sweeping off in the street?
I believe Hody froze.
At a very interesting time. It's a great face he's got there. We need to clip that and use it as a placeholder thumbnail.
Yeah, right? Well, I'm assuming his internet got cut. But we'll move back to him. You can.
Yeah. If he comes back, I can pause as he comes back and finishes his thought. But for me, I was thinking about when Kareem was talking about the elite strategy and all that stuff. It's just it's amazing to me to watch these same people who complain and decry, and basically their whole philosophy is about being anti-Marxism or anti-socialism, however they want to define it, and then going on and saying we should have we should have the elites or the bourgeoisie being fought against by the common man or the proletariat, and centralize these into very small community areas, like Soviets. And that's what the Soviet Union was, which is a bunch of small little localized control. And they're basically just repeating the same thing that Marx was trying to say in their own philosophy without saying it, without realizing they're doing it, right? So it's the same horseshoe theory back around in order to get to the same point for them. So that's always kind of fun to me to watch. And one of the things I found interesting is if you listen long enough, they will try to interject politics into institutions only in their own way. As long as it benefits them, they're okay with state control and state policies. And a great example of that was when everything was going on with COVID, and I was sitting there thinking, when they started closing down the schools and saying children need to be schooled at home now so we can isolate. That should have been the right wing's call to say, hey, we are finally going to accomplish this, getting kids into homeschooling, and how great and wonderful it is. Mm-hmm. But that's not what the ultimate goal was. The ultimate goal was to find fault with the policies that they were putting in place. Therefore, now we have study after study that they're touting over and over again about how bad kids did when they weren't in the school system, when they were at home learning. They've pushed back the homeschooling movement decades in order to achieve a political goal of fighting against the COVID regime, right? Because they couldn't think that far ahead. It was whatever we can accomplish or get our goals on now politically. And that's where all of that starts falling down when you introduce politics into institutional stuff that needs to be there, just not government wise. That's when you fall down. That's why the government's so bad at doing all this stuff, is because politics gets involved into it. And you're putting control in the hands of politicians instead of the people who know how to do the thing that you're trying to do. Again, back to Underwriters Laboratory is a perfect example. So that the real problem with the Paleo strategy was that it was just in my opinion, it was just a acknowledgement that all this time Rothbard was really a right-wing populist. He says that's what he was all this time, that he was masquerading when he was doing all the other stuff and talking about libertarianism. And he's finally felt comfortable to be back in his roots of right-wing populism. And that's what right-wing populism is. It's populism, meaning that individual rights are to be protected, except in these cases we don't think they should be protected. Right?
Yeah.
That's populism. And I have arguments with people saying that libertarianism and populism can coexist with each other. And in my opinion, they're a direct exact opposite of each other. When people say they don't like democracy or straight democracy because it doesn't protect the rights of the individuals or the minority, that's exactly what populism does. Populism is whatever the popular sentiment is, should therefore be what's in play. It doesn't matter what the individual thinks of it or what the individual wants to do or the individual rights being protected, as long as they're getting what they think should be. So I think it's an exact opposite. I think the idea of paleo libertarianism, as it was termed, is a oxymoron. It's a complete opposite of itself. And it's just like saying somebody's a progressive conservative, right? You can't be a progressive conservative because they're opposites of each other. Therefore, it's the same mindset, in my opinion. It's just a crawl into statism, a crawl into tyranny, in a way that makes people accept it or enjoy going that path because of the sloganeerism, the propaganda that comes along with it, right? So that's what I have to say about that. It's just a horrible idea, a horrible concept. And it's the complete opposite of what we should be trying to achieve as libertarians.
Exactly. Hody.
Sorry about that. Love thy neighbor. I think I got that part out, and then I apparently froze with a funny face. It's one of those things where your internet will play like what you can hear for like a minute until like I don't know why, but anyway, I got to hear about my goofy face from you guys personally. That means a lot to me. I just think, look, it's one of those that as much as you do to the least of these, you've done unto me. It's countless verses. You're supposed to be treating the people who are oppressed upon well. You're supposed to be treating your enemies better. If they smack you, offer them your other cheek. If they want your shirt, give them your coat. This is counter to nature. I get it. But it's what makes our faith so powerful, is that it is capable of saying, I know how to handle bad people. And it's not by perpetuating the same cycle of hate and anger and violence. It's by loving them. So for me, even when I hear about like somebody like Hoppe, who's clearly my enemy, like he would have no problem saying it himself, I'm sure. I would rather love and fix him than just try to drive him out so that he can start all his little terrible covenant communities. Right? And this is the way that we're supposed to deal when we see, if we are in Hoppe's position, we see people who we think are our enemies, the Democrats, the left, rappers, artists, whoever, like all the usual people that Hoppe rails on in his books, right? Like the people he strongly hates. Okay, well, what's the right thing to do about that? Is it to drive them away, to make them poor, to cast them into the sea and just let them wash up and die? Or is it to move in right next door to them and offer them a lifestyle that's so great that they want to be part of yours? The issue is because these people have betrayed actual Christianity, Christianity doesn't work. Because what Christianity does, if you're practicing it right, makes people want to join. But nobody wants to join your music-free, barbecue-free, art-free, creativity-free community. I mean, he calls it himself homogeneity. Over and over in his books, his goal is homogeneity. That's not appealing. And so you have to have force. And this is why I don't care how libertarian he says. Like, it's the lefty, like violent lefty early libertarians would do this all the time. Like, let's kill people, but voluntarily though, right? Like that, no, right? Like, no, like, sorry, alt-right, alt-left libertarians, like this isn't going to work for you. As Kareem mentioned, a lot of these successful ones are communalists, right? We recognize that people are different. We reward people different for different amount of efforts. This isn't a matter of treating every single person the same. It's a matter of treating them as individuals. And we understand that individuals have different needs. Some people want to live small lives. Some people want to live big lives. And we give them the opportunity to do either of those. And we don't sweep them off the streets when they're struggling. We help them. We ask them. We get involved with them. I don't want a society full of people who hate their neighbors or don't know their neighbors, right? Too often libertarians hold on to this, like, leave me alone, right? Like, my neighbor's business isn't my business. Yeah, well, if they're beating their kids, you can say it's not your business, but it should be, right? If they're racist, shouldn't it be your business? I'm not saying you need to go over there and beat them back or beat them to death, but it is something you should want to change. You're doing the literal first sin from Cain. Am I my brother's keeper? What, am I supposed to take care of him? Right? Like, yes, you are your brother's keeper. This is your brother in Christ. This is the implied answer to that question, right? So, like, this is how we should be acting. When we talk about localized tyranny, HOAs are terrible. First of all, drive across America, go to a community that doesn't have an HOA, and then drive through one that does. You can feel your soul get sucked out of an HOA. I personally, it's too long a story. I will address it some other time. I was involved in a legal battle with my HOA. The cost of it increased to higher than my mortgage. And there was nothing we, the homeowners, collectively, like 100% of us, united against our board could do. They got the governors involved, and it was, like I said, it's a different story for another time. But this is the extent of tyranny. If we see the HOAs get out of control, well, yeah, we all know politics grows. We all know authority grows. It can, this is the extent of it. It starts off as a nice little thing, maybe for something legitimate. Somebody's burning tires in their front yard or something. But where's the end of it? And is the right thing to stop it? Is it to love that person, teach them about the environment, or if you must, take the authority into your own hands? You don't need to start a legal body. You can just be like, nope, I'm not letting you do that, right? Like, I'm not letting you hit your kids. I'm stepping in, right? You have the moral authority to step in and do that. You don't need a legal body to do that. And this is something that I wish libertarians would kind of understand more, is they say, what are we going to do about it? And you either think do nothing or get the cops involved. There's this huge gap of personal behavior in between those two things that is beautiful, because it allows you to take different situations and handle them differently. Because we're dealing with individuals and not collectives, the solution isn't going to be the same every time. Different sins don't merit the same punishment. Even the same sin doesn't merit the same punishment from different people. Sometimes it's not punishment at all that solves the sin. I think most of the time, what solves the sin is love and community. So anyway, like I said, like, we're free to have this moral imperative to deal with it. I did want to end, we kind of talked about this localized tyranny. And I just want to say probably the worst thing that will happen to your life has nothing to do with government. And that's hard for us to say as people have united around anarchy, but it's absolutely true. Especially ask some of the women in your life. What's the worst time someone has exerted their authority over your bodily autonomy? Odds are it's not a cop. Odds are it happened at home and it was a family friend or at school, or their churches, even worse. These are by far the top 3 places where your bodily autonomy is violated. Happens with girls and boys. Prisons. I don't want to leave that one out. If you're an adult, that's by far the leader. Right? Convicted of a felony. I had a friend who was a felon because she gave an undercover cop a drug. And you might think, well, that's what she deserves. Cop said, I'm sick. I'm really hurting. And she said, you know what? I have some pain pills for my back. I'm willing to go through a little extra pain to bring you a little healing right now. If your back really hurts that bad, here you go. She's a felon. As a result, she can't vote in the state that she's in. She can't even carry a gun. She had her rights stripped away from her, and she was locked up in prison for a certain amount of time. Really nice girl. You actually saw her get engaged in this last Libertarian convention. One of the best people I know, and I have no problem saying that like I'm divulging something special, because she'll be the first to tell you all about her story. But Sarah's amazing, by the way. She's great. Somebody I used to talk to regularly with the Weird Libertarians podcast. But her story, just like, are you willing to say I don't care what happens to Sarah? Are you with Hoppe? Screw them. They're criminals. I don't care. Drug dealing, whatever, right? Or Javier Milei, two of them, right? Any of these guys dealing with it, like some of the worst. And screw that. Like, it's terrible. It's all of it. We don't need to pick and choose which tyrannies we care about. We have this idea that for some reason we're going to chop down the federal government by starting at the top. No, you start by chopping at home. You start by establishing freedom in the minds of your children, and then your community, your churches, your voluntary organizations. That's how you hack down the tree of liberty. You don't start at the top. You start at the bottom. When does the state really get cheesed off? Is it when you're out there in the streets being like, stop doing stuff to us, please? When is it you see like lines of cops get deployed? Feed and house the homeless. Oh my goodness. Get access to reading materials that teach anarchist theory. Oh my goodness. Right? You really want to get the state cheesed off? You're doing exactly what they want when you're just railing against them and complaining about them. When you actually take care of tyranny at home, as Reinhold suggested, do it. Be the solution. You want to waves of cops to murder you? Be the solution. That's the brave thing to do.
Also,
they will show up.
Also, I don't know how long
That's all I had. Go ahead.
Also, I don't know how long I've had this feature, but like somebody started playing music locally, so I fucking muted my own mic for the thing. I'm pretty sure that it wasn't that long, but if it was, then I apologize to the audience who's been seeing me speak but not hearing me. Anyway, fucking, yeah. Well, with all that being said, my guests, thank you again. I think this does do a relatively good job of concluding this series, unless, of course, I was just off for like 800 hours. We'll see. We'll see how that went. Either way, generally speaking, yeah, there's fascism coming down the pike, and this kind of thing is having its day in the sun. And ultimately, when we come down to it, we need to fight this kind of thing. And the next component of fighting that very thing, let's talk about Project 2025 on next week's stream. Because, to be honest, I'm somewhat familiar with that, but less familiar with that. So yeah, with all that being said, help people. Stop destroying and start creating. Stop the statism and start the community. We need to radically move back to a freedom-based mentality, away from this like modern libertarian control mechanism. And by back, I mean back to the original libertarian idea of anarchy first, and anything that disenables freedom being massively discouraged or outright not being done. Because the ultimate truth is, we can coalition way better with minorities and people in disempowered positions than we can with the state, bar none. And we can coalition much better with people on the ground than we can coalition with some rich fucks that we would need to schmooze with in order to make the paleo strategy work, even toward the right-wing ends of excluding left-wing people. And if you want a populist revolution of leftists against your populist revolution of rightists, if you want communism to take root, don't go any further than crushing literally everybody who happens to disagree with you about your right-wingism, because that's going to push this forward in a direction you don't want to fuck with. So, with all that being said, fuck around and find out. Smash the fucking state.
Oh, by the way,